All right, looks like we got enough people here, so I'd like to introduce Andy Szatko from Omaha Stormwater. He's going to be speaking to us today about sustainable landscape design. Andy, if you'd like to take it away.
Great. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for being here at 5:30 on a Wednesday. Beautiful day. I was just talking about how I was thinking about taking this show on the road and going outside and maybe even giving a tour um, of my yard. Not that there's a lot to show just because a landscaper's yard is always the last yard to get done. So but with that, my name is Andy Szatko. I work for the city of Omaha. I am part of a group called the Omaha Stormwater Program. Not that you need to know about the hierarchy of the city, but if you get the city of Omaha, Public Works Department, Environmental Quality Control Division, Stormwater Program, that's kind of where we reside. I do some work with a couple other divisions, but that's kind of the structure of the city and kind of where we live and reside. I was born and raised in Ralston. Currently live kind of near the Millard Airport today. So love this area, love the plants that are here. I actually went and got my undergrad in horticulture, landscape design. Had owned and operated my own business for quite a while, and then was in the landscape industry for a total of about 15 years before I got a chance to go back and get my master's degree in water resource planning and management and get to work with folks at the city. After that, to start doing green infrastructure projects. So we're going to learn a lot about green infrastructure today and some of the things that have worked and don't work, and tips and tricks guys that help you guys all out at your home as we go along. Go ahead and post questions if you have them. I've got my two screens going here, so hopefully I should be able to catch them as we go along. Definitely a people person, so I like it in-person stuff, but we'll make this as interactive as we can make it and make sure that we get you out of here on time and with some good knowledge. With that, one thing to say about this intro page, this is a picture of my aunt and uncle's house where we did some landscaping in their yard. There's two rain gardens, one that's upstream from this one, and they took it upon themselves to have some fun with it. And they have a couple of flamingos hanging out in the iris and the sedges that are in there. But this is a good example of if I didn't tell you there was a rain garden in here, you might not know there was one in there. And that's a lot of how I like to design because rain gardens are part of a landscape that's functional and uses the resources that come to it, including water. And it can look any way you want. This one's a fairly kind of a, we'll call it less formal, but not completely wild kind of a landscape. And so we'll get into that and tips and tricks for how to make your landscape yours, but also make it sustainable. All right. So first we'll go through, it'll just kind of set the stage for the reasons we're talking about water in our landscapes and using it to our advantage, kind of where what we do here at the program real quick. We'll start to talk about how we can use stormwater and green infrastructure at your home, give you some resources that you can use after this webinar so that you are ready to go. And then open up to Q&A at the end if we haven't answered your questions throughout the webinar. So the stormwater program, we do a lot of different things besides green infrastructure. Our program as a whole has 8 different areas that we focus on. Education and outreach. It's the reason I get to be here and talk with everyone here today is because we have a plan to promote and talk about stormwater management, green infrastructure. We engage the public. We take care of people doing pollution or dumping in the street. That's called an illicit discharge. Construction sites, making sure that pollution doesn't leave their sites. And then a number of other things there. If you want to learn more about each of these different programs, you can go to omahastormwater.org and check it out. So what is stormwater, first and foremost? I've had good conversations with my cousins at one point that talk about what exactly is stormwater, but at the very simplest level, it's precipitation, snow melt, snow, rain, sleet that runs off the surface, whether it's a paved road, grass, a forest. That's what we're talking about when we talk about stormwater and stormwater runoff. My background in this picture right here is a picture of Spring Lake Park from about 400 feet above Spring Lake Park, with a nice thunderstorm raining right over downtown Omaha, which is mostly impervious. And water runs off of all that impervious surfaces and has to go somewhere. And that's why we have to do what we do. When it rains, and I'm going to use a story from June 2008. It's near and dear to my heart because that's when my daughter was born. As an example of paved surfaces, buildings, the runoff that comes from it is significant, and we have to manage it in some form or fashion. Just getting rid of it kind of pushes that problem downstream, and we don't really want to do that because that's not a really effective way to manage runoff in our communities. So here in the June 2008 storm, there was about an inch of rain in a half an hour. Pretty intense storm, a quick hitting storm. There's 80 to 90 mile per hour winds. And this particular site is just surrounded by pavement. This is back in my contractor days near 84th and F, where a lot of runoff was dumping into this parking lot that you see there. And it was all had to fit into that one little manhole. And so that one manhole in the parking lot takes runoff from about 68,000 square feet, or about an acre and a half of surfaces draining to it. And so you can't fit a lot of water through a small pipe or a small opening, right? When you uncork your bathtub and it's full of water, does it drain instantly? No, because you can only get so much water through it. And that's the same concept here, is you can only get so much water that fits through that drain right there. On that 1 inch rain, all that surface draining to it's about 42,000 gallons of water just in that one area on that one rain event. So the volume and speed of water is a big deal, but sometimes we get too much of it. So we have flooding issues, flooding problems. This is a picture from the 2009. Actually, I take that back, 2011 Missouri River floods. Here's a picture driving around downtown Omaha. I came across this white streak coming down the street, and it came from an old paint can that came down the trash chute when this building was being constructed. That didn't fall nicely into the trash can, fell out of it. Some water came in the top, and then you had the paint running down. Able to see that, able to talk to them, able to stop it. That was a success in that regard for stopping water pollution. And I use that fire hose or that hose analogy, right? This pipe that you see here along the Big Papio Creek takes runoff from streets, but this happens all over the place. We move water quickly to our streams and creeks that aren't meant to handle having a lot of different fire hoses shot at it. And when we do that, the streams erode and they start to get deeper and deeper and impact the properties around it. So this one storm sewer outfall doesn't necessarily make this stream erode. It's all the other ones that kind of come in. So it's sort of a death by 1,000 cuts. And so we all play a role in it. Even though our one small role might be small, we all factor into it, and doing things at our homes really benefits the community as a whole. A fun client that came to me in my contractor days, where they said, the comment was, there is a river of water that comes through my backyard and gets within 3 feet of my house. And you can see this is a West Omaha neighborhood with walkout basements. And they're kind of, I would describe, at the top third of the neighborhood. And it's designed to have water flow through the backyard. So you can kind of see this low spot to the left of this playhouse where it's lowest, and it kind of comes through the chain link fence. The homeowner shared pictures with me of a storm from 2008 that shows about a 10-foot wide river, kind of white capping on the chain link fence, coming through and getting a couple feet away from the corner of his house. as that went down through the neighborhood, some of it gets peeled off between the homes. And so if nothing else, work with your neighbors, be nice and talk to your neighbors. We can solve a lot of problems with this kind of issues with just drainage as a whole, that we kind of are thoughtful for where water goes. Sometimes people want to put a pool in, and so now this pool comes in here. Before you do that, think about where the water flows. So with any project that you do at your house, think about that, because you don't want to get surprised when all of a sudden a river is going into your pool. I love to keep stats on rainfall in Omaha over year. So I've been doing this little simple graph now for a number of years when giving presentations. So if you've seen me before, you've seen this before. Adding in where we're at currently in 2022, our average rainfall is 30 inches, which is this black line that runs across it. And we're kind of bouncing above and below it. We're typically above it more than anything. 2020 was a very dry year. 2021 was a little bit more average. And so we're going to see where we're at in 22, but our winter last year was dry. We're shaping up to be a dry year this year. Farmer's Almanac says dry winter this year. So water is precious. We need water. And doing some of the things that we're going to talk about today is going to help your plants get through these dry periods better than they would if they're in a more traditional landscape that you have to water them yourselves, or you just kind of roll the dice and hope they can survive through the feast or famine kind of years that we have. The interesting thing about this graphic is if you take the wettest year in 15 and the driest year in 20, you got about 27 inches of difference between those two, which is almost our average annual rainfall. So if you just think about that, it is feast or famine for us. And if we can get a landscape that can live in those kinds of conditions, then we have a pretty sustainable landscape that can run through it. If you look at this graph down here on the right, every year you get different kinds of distributions of how big storms are. In 2020, we only had 2 events that were an inch or more. We had 7 that were greater than half an inch, but less than an inch. Most of our rain events were about 1/10 of an inch or less. And so the green infrastructure, as we talked about it, is really good at managing those storm events. And so even though green infrastructure as a whole, can only hold so much water, it does really good at capturing the dirtiest water, which is that first flush of rain that comes. And then also we can handle these smaller events with what we're going to be talking about today. So for most homeowners, or even business owners, if you own property and you're trying to figure out how to manage it, commonly we think about water as a problem. We want to control it. Like we want to get it away as fast as we can. A lot of perceptions of homeowners is, they like the idea of natural, landscapes, but by and large we like neat and tidy. But we don't want it too natural, right? So you get kind of the spectrum. Native plants equals no maintenance, right? It's definitely not the case, because if you just look at this picture, for example, this is nowhere near a native landscape for Omaha, Nebraska. This is a completely altered landscape. The soils are completely different. We cut and paste in our neighborhoods. We cut and paste when we build our homes. And so using native plants is great because they're used to our environment, but they may not be used to the urban nature in which we put them in. So I always work with folks and try to help change that mindset. We want to manage water. If you do a landscape project at your house, think about water. Where is it going to go? Do you want to do anything with it? Or do you want to just kind of give it a pretty way to get through your landscape, like using rock? No matter what, as you think about it and you want to have a sustainable landscape that uses this green infrastructure that we're talking about to keep it and use it on the property, think about the 3 S's: slow, sink, and spread. If we can slow water down, it gives it a chance to soak into the ground. or sink into the ground. And then water flows really fast when we put it into pipes or in narrow channels, like you see here, like this dry stream bed here. So we can slow this water down, give it a chance to kind of soak in the ground at different points, and then spread it out so it doesn't have as much energy. Those are really good ways to think about water as it flows into and through your house. It's a variety of styles. It can be formal, it can be informal, and then all landscapes require maintenance. Doesn't matter what you're doing, it's going to require some level of maintenance at some point in time. So the notion of no maintenance doesn't exist unless you actually live in an apartment and it's managed by groundskeepers and somebody else worries about it. But even in that case, somebody has to think about the grounds at that apartment complex. So I'm sure everyone already knows this. I won't necessarily ask for comments in the chat section, but what is a sustainable landscape? A broad term, right? It's a general term. I think in the context of what we're going to talk about today is it's something that kind of nurtures and preserves itself over time. Doesn't require a lot of additional amounts of water, chemical fertilizers, or pesticides. It's kind of self-sustaining, right? It can grow in the conditions it's in. That's a good way to think about a sustainable landscape in our own landscapes. The things we're going to talk about today are definitely going to be focused on the water side of things, and trying to make sure we use sustainable landscapes to manage our water that lands on our property. But it can mean a lot of different things, but we're going to focus on this little area of this concepts for sustainable landscapes as we kind of work through the webinar. All right, green infrastructure. I'd say raise your hand if you know what that is, but to define it so that we all know what it is, it's simply the preservation. Don't screw it up in the first place. Don't destroy nature. Let's connect nature. Let's connect these elements that we use to manage water together. And then let's mimic Mother Nature to manage rain where it lands. This is a picture of Creighton Prep. This is Western Street, and behind me, after taking this picture, that's 72nd Street. And so we are, there wasn't anything here to preserve, but if we had like a nice native prairie up here, we could preserve that, not turn it into a parking lot, and that does a lot of good for managing rain for that area. But here we're managing this parking lot up here for Creighton Prep, and then there's a swale at the bottom of this hill that takes the runoff from the baseball fields and the athletic fields. All kind of comes down and comes out here on the west side of the rain garden here. And we use lots of native plants and adapted plants just to give it a nice pattern to it so it looks nice, but the native and adapted plants are able to put its roots down deep, open up pores, increase infiltration, and this water will only stay here for a short period of time. We'll learn more about that here in a little bit, but that's what green infrastructure is all about. Is we have created something that connects and mimics natural processes to manage rain here at this particular site. Benefits of green infrastructure practices, just like with any other landscape, is it becomes a habitat for pollinators, insects, birds, animals. It looks good. It improves aesthetics, improves home values if done well. It keeps water clean and makes people happy. I'm sure most people here realize that they're a little bit happier when they're in nature, or at least have elements of nature around them. Green infrastructure practices often show up in this list that you see here on the left. So green infrastructure can be a rain garden. It can be a bioswale, which is, for lack of a better description, a ditch that's vegetated. Xeric gardens, they're more drought tolerant landscapes that just can live on what lands on it. So it's kind of the opposite of a rain garden in that it's a landscape that only gets what falls directly on it to survive. Soil conditioning is improving our soils for from being impacted from human development and improving soil. Green roofs, putting vegetation on our roofs to kind of slow water down there. Permeable pavement, having water soak through hard surfaces so they can soak into the ground underneath it. And trees. Trees are just wonderful natural green infrastructure tools, because the canopy of a tree will capture rain and slow it down before it hits the ground, and its roots will help use the water and lift water up and out and improve the environment as a whole where they're planted. All right, so let's get down to the home landscapes and everything and start to crank through some strategies you can do at home. This is that landscape. This is the other side of that landscape from the title slide. So this is shortly after installation, and you can see my kids, my two kids and our neighbor friend playing in the landscape as well. Anytime you can incorporate paths or elements in the landscape that kids can have fun with, go for it. I think landscapes should not be things that are off limits, but should be engaged with as well. So starting with the soil in our landscapes, I think most everyone here will probably have a lawn or a landscape. So I'm going to talk about both approaches in general as we start to dive into it. Our homes are built, whether it's as big as this one or smaller or whatever the case may be. To build that structure, we have to get equipment in there and move around, and we compact soils. And the soil that's left over is pretty bare and not full of nutrients that vegetation needs. So compost is a wonderful thing. It's a great element to add into any disturbed lawn, existing or brand new. And so here's, we did a hands-on workshop to build a rain garden. And one of the first steps was the areas outside of the rain garden. We put about 1 inch to 2 inches of compost over the area after we stripped away the turf. We rented a rear tying tiller to incorporate that compost as deep as we can to about 4 to 6 inches. And then that helps create a nice sponge for the plants to put its roots into and soak up rain that lands on it. Anytime you can, you may not need to add compost to your yard. It may be really good soil to begin with. And so make sure you get a soil test that tells you how much organic matter you have in it. What's your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and that'll tell you what you should or shouldn't need to add to it to sustain your turf or your plants. A good rule of thumb, like on that bare site here, would be 2 inches of compost in the top 6 inches to start that sponge and get the grass going and getting established in the yard. For those with existing yards, topping off the landscape with compost, like a thin layer of compost with your aeration in the fall, is a good strategy for doing some fertilizing of the yard. It does a really good job. It adds microbes and beneficial fungi to the soil, and you treat the soil versus putting fertilizer on it. That is more or less, here's a pill that you have to keep taking all the time to be healthy. Doing the compost and nurturing the soil makes it so that the soil does all the work. You don't necessarily have to give it pills because it's already in a healthy state. If you go to omahastormwater.org, this is something I would describe or define as soil conditioning. And we have a fact sheet there that tells you a little bit more about the basics of how to improve your soil. And that's one of the best things you can do in general. After we improve our soils, then we can start to explore options for rain harvesting. So we're going to collect some rain for a dry day. And here's a picture of a homeowner I worked with where we did some rain barrels. And this hatch that you see here is actually a hatch to a 2,000 tank cistern that feeds some water features in the backyard and drip irrigation for 2,000 square feet of landscaping. So there's different scales to this. We're going to kind of keep it on the smaller level so that we can all take advantage of, taking small baby steps, and that's going to be a rain barrel. And if you go to this, again, omahastormwater.org, you can get this brochure. We have hard copies of this in various different areas. But this brochure will walk you through step by step for how to build a rain barrel and then get it installed at your house. As you do, rain barrels have some fun along the way. So a downspout doesn't have to be a downspout. It could actually be a rain chain, which is pretty cool. And it's a lot more ornamental than a downspout. It doesn't necessarily clog as much, and it makes it easier to kind of unclog it. I've seen all sorts of different things, from just a chain to these little buckets to everything in between. Oh, I just now pulled up the Q&A, which is not in the chat. Yes, it's legal to collect rain in Nebraska. The notion where it's illegal to harvest rain, it primarily comes from Colorado, where the view is the runoff from the mountains feeds lots of streams and rivers. And so you can't harvest water in Colorado because that source water has to feed the rivers and lakes for everyone downstream. And that's a very broad general statement, but in general, that's why it is illegal, even though they have lessened it a little bit over the years. Harvesting water here in Omaha, in Nebraska, perfectly fine, promoted, and there's rules in place to be able to do that in a good way. So in general, when you want to build your own rain barrel, keep it simple, right? We have to get water into the barrel. This particular picture is a traditional 55-gallon drum with no opening on the top that I was able to purchase and use as a demonstration from Jones Barrel Company. If you go to Lowe's, Home Depot, in their landscape section, they have a pond section where they have plant baskets and plant bags. And if you were to get this 10-inch basket and bag, you can put this basket in the bag and then cut this hole just big enough to capture the lip on that basket. It sits in there nicely, and the downspout coming down off of the house will shoot into it, and it makes it easy to grab it, shake it out, put it back into place, and that mesh will keep those mosquitoes out of there. So we got to get water in. That's a nice, easy way to do it. Then we need to get water out. So you just need to get a spigot and put it on the bottom of the barrel so you can draw water out and use it as you see fit. Now, to get water out from a spigot like this, you got to get some cinder blocks and lift that barrel up, because in this picture, I can't get my hose easily screwed onto it or put a watering can underneath it to fill it up to go around and water the plants. So make sure you're doing that as well. There are some interesting styles on the internet that you can look up where this hole is actually on the bottom and they stick a pipe out and then put the spigot underneath it so you can get all the water from the whole barrel out as well. Google this stuff, you'll see all sorts of variations on it, but the notion here is you have to have a way to get the water out. Now, you got to get the water out when there's too much water coming down your downspout, and it's got to go somewhere else. The number one thing to keep in mind is, okay, my downspout is this big. I have to have an opening that big as my overflow. So here on the right side of this picture, you got a 4-inch pipe at the top that can let water out. This particular case, I was playing with this design to be able to rotate this elbow around. So let's say the water gets up to here and then it starts to overflow. I can rotate that elbow down a little bit so that I can still use some of this area, because that hole at the top, you can let a lot of water out and you don't get as much storage. So you can play with it a couple different ways, but the reason you have that size as big as the downspout is, then water will always flow through it and not back up and start to back up against your foundation or up your downspout to cause issues. Water always has to be able to move downstream safely. So make sure you think about that and set it up in the right way at your particular home. Here's a larger case where with a 500 gallon rain silo, We did this as a demonstration project at Dundee Elementary School. If you ever get the chance to go by there, beautiful landscape. We did all sorts of things with the school to create a green infrastructure classroom there. So check it out. It's a great facility, great place to go. All right, then we're going to collect some more rain, not in our rain barrels, but in our rain gardens. This is where I'll spend a little bit of the most amount of time, because even if you don't make it a rain garden, you can make it a landscape that can handle a little bit of flow, and I'll teach you the ins and outs of that here next. So this is a rain garden we worked with a homeowner in the Saddle Hills neighborhood near 80th and 4th Street. And so I would not recommend necessarily pulling in runoff from a street. You really have to kind of know what you're doing, because the amount of runoff from a street is significant, and there could be a lot of debris that comes off of it. And there's other steps you need to take with permits to be able to cut the curb in the first place. So I show this as an example of a large scale residential rain garden. But I would encourage you to aim small, miss small, and kind of focus on the runoff from your downspouts and your driveways, your sidewalks. So a rain garden, simply put, is a shallow depression that uses native and adapted plants to soak in and filter stormwater, and it drains within 24 hours. A rain garden, there isn't a set depth to it, but the maximum depth that you would want to hold water in there is about 12 inches. And that depth is measured so this water's coming in from the left. Well, we have to create a bowl with a flat bottom. And so we're usually making a berm on that downstream side. And so the top of that berm is where water would go over it and go somewhere else. So if you were to run a string line from there back to where the water's coming in, and at the deepest point, that's where we're measuring 12 inches. Got a few more pictures here that'll help kind of tell that story a little bit more, but that's a rain garden. That's what the depth means when we're talking about it. And it doesn't have to be 12. The depth is going to be determined by how much water can soak into your yard within 24 hours. So here's a rain garden in action in that same neighborhood. Water's coming down the street. You can see here is where we designed an overflow as a like spout in the bowl in the pitcher that lets water come this way when it's full. This particular rain garden is designed to let water flow past it once it's full. So we're peeling off as much water as we can, but the rest of it we can't handle, so it goes downstream from it. You can see the begonia, the blue muffin viburnums, the sedges here. Got a few weeds growing in here as well, but the water coming in comes into this area that can handle that flow, fills up, overflows down there, but the rest of it that can't fit in there flows right past it. And this is what a rain garden looks like in action. It's designed to hold water. It'll have that water for up to 24 hours later. It's not a pond. It's not a wetland. It's a rain garden. So if you do a rain garden in your home and you start talking to people, or they come over when it's full of water, you can educate them and let them know. Here's a time lapse of the UNO Welcome Center, or the Hayden House as it's referred to now, of a full growing season from 2019. And a rain garden takes on many different aesthetics throughout the season. And so this is a relatively young garden when this time lapse was taken. But I'd like to show this to be able to show, okay, here's our spring cleanup. We took all the vegetation out so it doesn't fill up the rain garden. Plants grow throughout the season. We get some spring flowers. The trees start to leaf out. The little lemon goldenrod is supposed to only stay about 12 inches, but it decided to revert to its native self and start to grow, 5, 6, 7 feet tall. Here we have some weeds growing right up next to it. And here in a little bit, we maintained it. We cut it back. Getting near fall time. Goldenrod's falling down. We got our asters over here to the left. fall sets in. There's some plants, we start to get a little snow in there. And it really evolves over the seasons. Plants will do what they want to do. So as you use different kinds of plants or different varieties of plants, just know that sometimes you're going to get plants that want to go back to its native self and become unruly. And that feeds into the notion of landscapes need maintenance. For a rain garden, similar to a rain barrel, we need to get water into it. We need to let it get out of it, overflow it. It needs to have a flat bottom to it. If you think of a glass of water, for example, if I tilt it, water would pour out of it, it can't hold as much. If I hold it level with a flat bottom to it, my cup can hold as much water as it is designed for. The same thing is for the rain garden and the landscape, is you want to have that flat bottom so water, one, spreads out over the bottom to soak in, and two, you can hold as much water in it as you can. We're going to have a berm. We're going to have a rim around it to make sure to hold the water in. We need to make sure our soils are good and it can soak up whatever water we store in there. We'll mulch it a little bit to help keep the weeds down at first, and then we got to make sure our plants are in there. As you start to design your own landscape, we have to think about where it's going to be. Good rules of thumb is 10 feet away from foundations, not upstream of a structure with a basement, for example. What's the orientation of it so it actually captures water? And then the aesthetics, making sure you put short plants at the front, taller plants towards the back or middle. All good traditional elements that you take into account when you do your landscapes. Now, these are the questions you want to ask yourself when you're considering a rain garden. What kind of soil do I have? And you're going to do that by digging in where you want to do your rain garden and see what the soil looks like. Also, when you need to know how much water can soak in, dig a 1 by 1 by 1 hole, fill it up with water, let it soak in for a little bit, let it drain out, fill it up again, put a stick in the side of the hole where the top of the water is, start a timer, and then measure how fast it draws down. If you have really good soils, it might not take very long. If you have really compacted soils, clay soils, or in a new neighborhood, for example, it may take a long time. So you may have to sit there for an hour or two, or run your timer for an hour or two to see how far it drops in that time. You want to get ultimately to how much water soaks in 24 hours. If you're at an inch per hour, you can do 24 inches. Remember, we don't really want to go much deeper than 12 inches. So you kind of hit that 12-inch mark, and you could infiltrate that in 24 hours. If we're at 1/4 of an inch an hour, that's only what? 1/4 of 24 is 6 inches. So you would only want your rain garden 6 inches deep. And that's a really easy way to kind of get a sense for how much water can soak into your yard. Now our soils are really dry right now, so if you went and did a test, you may want to wet it a couple times before you actually clock it, but that's a great way to figure out how much water it can soak in. Where is the water coming from? How is it going to get into the garden? Make sure that you are orientating the garden to capture as much as you can. What is coming towards it? Is it just landscape runoff? Is it runoff from the driveway? You may want to think about plants that are salt tolerant. If you're next to your driveway, you salt your driveway because the ice is over. And then how does water flow through my property? Where's the best place to intercept that water? Or should I do it in a couple different spots? It doesn't have to be a one rain garden property. You can do multiple ones, smaller ones, across the yard as well. Some location considerations, again, 10 feet away from buildings, near where water is flowing, flatter areas are preferred. If you got a real steep area, to get that flat bottom, you're gonna have to cut a lot and then paste a lot to get that flat. So anytime you can get into flatter areas, it's going to be easier to build. Typically, sunnier locations give you more options for plants. Avoid steep slopes, avoid areas where water sits, because that's an indication that the soil doesn't soak in a lot of water. And avoiding under trees so you don't damage the roots. If you plant a tree in conjunction with a rain garden, that's different. But existing mature trees, you kind of want to avoid those so you don't damage their roots. So you can get water into a rain garden in a lot of different ways. The picture here on the top left is my house, where I'm taking my downspout and I'm recycling some limestones with a retaining wall to kind of take that initial impact of the water from the downspout. I'm kind of spreading it out. And then I have the rain garden here with iris sedges there. Coming off the street, we have a utility box where we cut a notch in it to let sediment and other junk from the street settle out, and we can easily scoop it out, that debris out, instead of trying to rake it out from the rain garden itself. Bottom right's another example of a utility box. And then over here on the lower left, downspout just flows across grass, and that is perfectly fine. It's great, it's simple, it's easy. And then the grass gets a little extra water on its way to the rain garden. Now, getting water out, we have our bowl right here in the top left corner. There's a low spot in the berm that lets water go from one rain garden to the next. Sometimes we don't want it to be vegetated in that overflow area, so we put cobblestones, and we make sure our berm next to it is a few inches higher than this, so water always comes out this way. This lower left one's in Florence, right on 30th Street. Water comes in off the street. Once this area fills in with water, water physically cannot get in there anymore, and will just continue flowing down the street. So there is technically no overflow. It's designed to minimize how much water can actually get in there. And sometimes we have pipes that stick up to a certain elevation, and then water goes in there safely somewhere else if you're surrounded by sidewalks or buildings or something else like that. So here's a good graphic for talking about how to set that flat bottom of the rain garden as well. So when you first start, you kind of figure out, all right, here's the uphill side, here's the downhill side. You get a little stream level, a couple bucks from Menards, you can set it on there, and you measure down to where you want to go. Here's the original grade, and so you kind of dig this out, and you use that soil that you dig out to make the berm down here on the downstream side. There's been projects where I've worked on where I just cut and paste as much as I need to create a big enough area and create a big enough berm that I don't have to haul in material. So maybe I could soak in 12 inches of rain, but in this particular landscape, I'm only going to do 4 inches because that's all I have the budget for, the capacity for, the strength for. And so that's a way to think about it. And this is an easy way to kind of help you figure out what it takes to construct it. You don't want your berms too steep because plants don't like to grow on stuff that's too steep. So feathering things out is a good idea as you move along. 3 to 1, 3 run over a 1 foot high, 3 to 1 foot rise is good. Same thing on the uphill side. It'd be nice to have a nice gentle slope coming down. If you can't do that, retaining wall or boulders is a nice touch to use in the landscape. Once we build that structure, here's our berm of a rain garden in Hastings, where we're doing a rain garden workshop. Here's our overflow. We want to put the spreading plants that are rhizomatous near where water comes in, so that the plants can help hold the soil in place, and over here near the outlet. Keep planting plants simple. Fewer plants is easier to maintain, because then you know what you're looking for as they grow and spread, and you can pull the weeds out in between. Ultimately, nature's going to decide kind of which plants are happy, which ones are spreading, or maybe are too happy and need to get thinned back a little bit. But think about easing into it with whatever landscape you do. You can always add more later. Planting patterns help identify weeds. So this rain garden at Saddlebrook Elementary School, we have black-eyed Susans, Joe Pye weed, Monarda, and we have some daylilies here. I was able to bring my crew out here, tell them, here's the plants, don't pull them, but pull everything else out in between. And that gets us to a point where you may have a landscaper who comes in and they may be a new landscaper, they're learning, but these kinds of tips and tricks help you as the owner if you want to do your own maintenance, and also for the contractor that may come in and may have new staff regularly, and you just kind of want to make it as easy as possible to maintain. Native and well-adapted plants are awesome because they have deeper roots than plants like daylilies or spirea, for example. So anytime you can use plants like big blue stem or Indian grass in the bottom of a rain garden, those plants have really deep roots and will only improve infiltration over time. Here's a graphic that kind of shows what I just said. Spirea, daylilies, shallow roots relative to prairie dropseed, black-eyed Susan, or even like the common 9-bark can have roots that go down 14, 15 feet. We're gonna go a little bit quick here through these last few slides. I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. Native and well-adapted plants, they add habitat value. They typically don't need fertilization once they get established or adapted to our climate. Native doesn't mean that the plant grows well in every site or location also. So if your plant isn't doing well, you just may not be happy in that particular location. And then there's this acronym that isn't used, but it's used in a few different publications with the city of Omaha. It's called NEWNIPS, Native, Ecologically Well-Adapted, Non-Invasive Plants. It's kind of a fun acronym. It opens the door for non-native stuff to be included, even because they are a good plant for the climate. They're non-invasive, they're well-adapted. And so choose your plants as you see fit. Because there's something to be said about using those plants that are native here, our insects and our wildlife love. I got home from work one day and just saw a bumblebee hanging out with penstemon, so I took a little video of it. So when I go to 3rd grade classes or elementary schools, they always get a kick out of seeing the bumblebee getting in the flower and being so excited to get in there and enjoy it. Foliage texture and form as you plant your landscapes. Always think about shorter plants front, taller in the back. But here you got all sorts of stuff going on. Steve Rohde is a great friend, colleague, advisor of mine through life. And he designed this particular landscape at 58th and Maple Street. It's kind of the east gateway of Benson early on. And there's a lot going on, but there's also a nice rhythm to it. Plants are able to spread out and do their thing, like oh, I'm drawing a blank here. It's not the primrose, but purple poppy mallow down here. Nice spreading ground cover. It looks beautiful. We've got some Virginia mountain mint, fox sedge here in the middle. Creighton Prep is a great site where you have sees bursts of fall color with the woods purple asters. Talking with the neighbors over here, they absolutely love this time of year because you get the contrast of the browning grasses and seed heads, the fox sedge moving texture here throughout the bottom of the gardens, and then the pop of color with those asters. Massing is more, so you got Carl Forster grass with a shorter grass in between, and you got some switchgrass over here. I think it says Shenandoah switchgrass in the backside. It kind of gives that light smoky color and feel to it. Don't put tall plants in small landscapes. It just doesn't work very well because you're either going to have to prop them up, or they're going to fall over, or they're going to block your view. Any number of those things. Just make sure that your height of plants is proportional to the actual landscape itself. Here's a good one. in Columbus, Nebraska, next to their football stadium, of some Johnson's Blue, Cranesbill along the edges, Palm Sedge behind it, some Black-eyed Susan in the middle, some Little Joe Piley. The colors all kind of blend and work well together. Small little rain garden here in the West Omaha home that takes runoff from the yard. And then from the downspouts over here are brought over directly into the rain garden. Instead of just a straight berm, we put in some boulders along the edge to look nice. Kind of cap the end with some switchgrass, shorter plants in the landscape next to it. And again, we'll call it traditional suburban landscape. And we're able to do a rain garden that blends into the neighborhood. The worst day is often the worst day. First day is the worst day. So using a little bit bigger scale than a homeowner is the rain gardens that we did in Florence along 30th Street between Clay and Willett. And when they first went in September 26th of 2012, it was called a death trap, a graveyard, or a grave. Why did we draw the short straw? Lots of number of things, because this looks pretty sad. But we worked, and I talked with a lot of the merchants in the area, and just let the plants do their thing. And later the next year, we ended up adding some dogwoods, the switchgrass, the sedges all started to fill in, and that aesthetic changed. And so it's really tough to get through those first few days, months, and years. But once you get through it, it's amazing what the plants can do for you. This was a rain garden that never actually took place in Dundee, just because the slopes were so steep. And that's part of the reason I show this picture, is we can't fit green infrastructure or rain gardens everywhere. It sometimes just doesn't make much sense. And so in this particular case, he had such steep sides and such a little bottom that it was more detrimental than anything for, safety concerns around the sidewalk, the different utilities going in through here. So plan for ahead and for the space that you have. Picture of that rain garden in Florence after the rain is done. You can see all the debris that came off the street after this particular rain event. It's quite a bit. Need to make sure we clean it up and out and properly dispose of it. Moving on to the resources, go online to omaha-stormwater.org, and there's these two manuals there, Sustainable Landscapes. For the homeowners here, definitely pull this one. If you need hard copies, we still have hard copies available, but it's a wonderful guide that guides through a lot of what we just talked about today. So check it out. For the contractors here, definitely look at the bioretention gardens one, and that one's a little bit more designer contractor focused. OmahaPlants.org. We're currently going through a little bit of a website update, but this website has a wonderful plant list in it. Tells you about the different attributes of what kind of plant put where. So here you got Amsonia. It is good for rain gardens, bioretention. You want to put it on the side slopes and the top of the berm of a rain garden, for example. And so OmahaPlants.org tells you a lot of information about how to use it in your landscape. The Nebraska Extension Office has an online rain garden design NEB guide. And so you can go to this extension or just Google rain garden design NEB guide, and you'll be able to pull it up, and it walks you through a nice interactive rain garden design. On the Extensions Office, they have great resources, videos, animations as well, including sizing worksheets. With that,
all right. Before we get to questions real quick, a brief survey is going to be sent out to all you guys, if you wouldn't mind filling that out. So while everyone fills that out, we got a couple of questions here. Send in any more if you have. This is, right now, might be your last chance to ask Andy Szatko, Stormwater expert, if I wouldn't mind saying that about you. Some pretty cool questions. Uh, question that I actually have, if you wouldn't mind answering, is what is the state of stormwater management in Omaha right now? Like, do we have issues moving water where it needs to go?
It's a big question. Good question. And so the state of stormwater in Omaha, I would definitely say there are problems all over. We take complaints from the public about, homeowner stuff to large scale stuff. We interact with the program that's doing our combined sewer program, for example, and part of the problem is runoff. And so we're doing a lot of good things with trying to manage and use the landscape to our advantage. We are chipping away at the problems. We are getting better at it as well. So to your point, yes, we're getting better, but there's a long list that will continue as we chip away at addressing the ones at the top of the list. And I think I would definitely encourage everyone to Google this kind of stuff and then go to omahastormwater.org to get as much information as you can as you go out. And I guess even at a more basic level, if you're going to reach out to landscapers, ask the questions we've been talking about today. Ask them where the water is going to go. Ask them how they're designing it. Tell them why are they designing it that way. Will it hold up? This forces the industry to get better, and you will get a better landscape as a result. What is your favorite project you've worked on? Well, there's a few of them. The couple I showed, Creighton Prep, was a very fun one because we ran through a lot of trials and tribulations getting it built. Dave Dow, who was the instigator of that project, is a wonderful man who has maintained that garden over the years. And it looks wonderful. I really enjoy how it turned out. Our 58th and Maple Street skate project is a great one where we learned a lot from it. It's a beautiful addition to the landscape. The Florence streetscapes, the people there thought they were low on the priority list and they got all this horrible landscaping. But it was only about 3 years later, there was a public meeting for phase 2 of that streetscape project where there was 3 people that complained. The neighborhood came out. I just attended the meeting just to listen, but the neighborhood rallied around those rain gardens and said they didn't want to remove it as part of the phase 2 of the streetscape. And it's probably one of the most proud moments I had when that the neighborhood, didn't like it. They grew to love it. They wanted to keep it. They liked the sustainable aspects of it, and they kept them. They saved them all on their own. And so that was a really, really cool project.
Oh, we have another question in the chat.
Okay. So hi, Ann. Good to hear from you. So you're 250 miles west, you're on a farm, ditches, flow through property. Do you have any suggestions to keep water out of my basement? I have ditches. Okay, so you're on a farm. So are the ditches along the roads? Is water flowing towards your house? I would simply say, the first questions is, identifying the source of water, right? Water can't get in your basement unless it comes from somewhere. And that's at the very basic question to kind of answer. So for me, in my neighborhood, my source of runoff is from my neighbor's downspouts in his yard coming into my backyard, and his downspouts has runoff coming right towards one side of my house. So when my basement flooded, I regraded the side of my yard into a swale to carry it around to the front yard and side yard where I could manage it with rain gardens. So ditches are by the road, the runoff comes from the hills. Got it. So you're more concerned probably during those big rain events where you get so much water that it comes out of the ditches and maybe backs up in a location somewhere else. And if that's the case, that's Mother Nature will always one up you. So, thinking about how high did the water get on this storm event, marking symbolically, it's called high water marks, right? You see them on bridge structures, crossings, even in buildings that want to memorialize a flood that happened. When certain rain events happen, kind of note where that happens. And then now all of a sudden, if you wanted to protect your house to a certain storm event, right, you could maybe add some topography, enhance your ditches to address that kind of a storm event that happens. So it's kind of a gray, wishy-washy answer to your question, but it helps you maybe think about how to start keeping water out of your basement and looking at that root cause of it. So hopefully that helps you a little bit. Great question.
All right. Seeing that there are no more questions coming in, I'm just gonna say thank you, Andy, for showing up and giving this event. It's been really great, very insightful. I can, to speak for myself, I really enjoyed listening to it and hearing it. Big thank you from Conservation Nebraska.
Thank you very much and have a great evening, everybody.
Oh,
hey.
got one question right there.
Hi, Lasagna. What can training outside do you provide to train community on more facilitate community-driven decentralized water retention? Got it. Pretty much you can call us anytime, and we work with people that ask us to come talk to their groups. So I personally have talked with church groups, neighborhood groups, elementary schools, colleges, plant groups, garden groups. So if you want to set something up, you can reach out to us. 444-3908 is our hotline, our main number. You can call us and talk. Not that you care. I recently kind of moved out of my formal position in the stormwater program in a different project role. That particular number, you want to ask for Heaven or Chris. They're kind of the leaders of the stormwater program now. But give them a call or send them an email through our website as well to say you have an interest in setting something up. We've actually done rain barrel workshops for Girl Scouts before, so that's fun as well. So give us a shout. We'll talk with you and see what we can do.
All right, we got the phone number and the link to Omaha Stormwater in the chat there for anyone who's interested. I'm gonna wait a second this time for any last questions.
Sounds good.
But seeing that, once again, thank you, Andy. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this event. I hope you learned and found it informative and entertaining.
Thank you.
Have a great night, y'all.